Hello, everyone. I see some people still connecting to audio, and it is now time. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Elias. I'm the director of the USDA Southwest Climate Hub, located in Las Cruces, New Mexico, but covering 5 states in the Southwest. And I'm very excited to present today the Precision Ranching Technologies webinar. And that is presented by or supported by the Sustainable Southwest Beef Project. And we have 4 excellent speakers today to talk with us about precision ranching technologies and education and some really exciting work that's being done. I'd like to begin today with a land acknowledgement. I begin this meeting today by acknowledging that the land that each of us is joining from today is the ancestral land of Indigenous cultures. As we are all calling from different parts of this country, it'll be different lands for all of us. Where I'm speaking from today is the ancestral lands of the Ute, Apache, the Pueblos, Hopi, Zuni, and the Dene Nation. I believe it's important to provide this acknowledgement because the narratives of this land and region have long been told from one dominant perspective without full acknowledgement of the people who lived before us on this land. And it's also important because many of us are land managers and work in support of land managers, and we strive to manage the land well for future generations and for the good of all. Thank you very much for your attention and respect in acknowledging this important history. I'd also like to encourage you to please use the chat box at any time during the webinar. If you have questions, put them in the chat box. We will have 2 times during this webinar to answer some questions, one about halfway through and then one at the end. So please do use the chat box and we will allow some time for the presenters to answer those questions. Our first speaker today is Dr. Shelomia Nayamure-Kunge, and he's a research associate at New Mexico State University. His research includes studying the grazing behavior, mother-offspring interactions, and heat tolerance, and also the use of UAVs or drones as a tool for animal monitoring in extensive cattle ranching systems across New Mexico in the US and Chihuahua in Mexico. He is currently working with the Sustainable Southwest Beef Project, contributing to the precision ranching and breed comparison research. Shelomia?
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I'll share my screen. Can everybody see my slides?
Yes, they look great.
Beautiful, beautiful. So yeah, as presented, I'll be looking at precision ranching. But before we go into it, I wanted to introduce some of the key members within this team. And at the beginning here, we have Dr. Santiago, Dr. Whipping Cow, Dr. Laura Boucheron, Dr. Matthew McIntosh, Mr. Andrew Cox, Dr. Rick Estelle. I believe now it's Dr. Shishu. And we are also fortunate to be joined by researchers from Scotland Rural College, Dr. Tony Waterhouse and Dr. John Holland. So for the roadmap of my presentation, I'll start with the overall umbrella project that is covering the precision agriculture. Then I'll go into the precision agriculture, the implementation of precision ranching, looking at the case study, looking at different sensors that we are using in our project, looking at the dashboard application. This is more like the translation of the precision tool into a decision-making tool. And then we will jump into virtual fencing, looking at our proposed research that will be taking place this year. And then at the end, I will end with the future of precision ranching kind of options. So for the Sustainable Southwest Beef Project, I'd like to orient you to a publication by Spiegel and others that have gone in details describing the overall project. But for a summary, I'll just read the mission statement that states the Sustainable Southwest Beef Team is evaluating Raramuri Criollo cattle, precision technologies and trade-offs among beef supply chain options from pasture to plate, to enhance ranch and rangeland resilience in the Southwest United States. This is a 5-year CAP grant by the USDA NIFA. And another component that I want to highlight is that it includes the education and extension component and the information flowing bidirectional. So for a summary of what we mean by precision ranching, I've included a little diagram here showing input, processing, and output. And one example that I can think of is probably a poultry barn, where inputs that we'll be looking at will be probably a thermosensor, and then a processing will be more like a set maximum or minimum temperature, and an output being an agricultural equipment, maybe a ventilator. And depending on what the temperature logger logs in, we will then translate if it is above that threshold mean, and for the ventilator to be enabled. What I've just explained is what we classify as a single input, single output scenario. And it's very common in intensive agriculture and agronomical practices on the precision ranching end. But when we consider range management, we'll probably be looking at the multiple input, multiple output scenario. Excuse me, let me put a pointer here. Multiple input, multiple output scenario, in the sense that not only will we be gathering data from the animal itself using sensors, we need some environmental sensors as well to make some decisions on what to do within the range management platform. As described by LACA 2009, precision livestock production focuses on animal components and exploits heterogeneity of space and among individual animals, improving efficiency and sustainability. In their model, they were looking at fully automation of this precision ranching, but in our proposed work, we are looking at a platform where we give out a decision-making tool for the ranchers. So for the tasks and objectives of our research, we first set out a questionnaire to cover 36 ranchers and feeders throughout the Southwest United States, as depicted by this figure here. And questions were asked: out of those participants, how many would consider animal sensors? And 31% say they would. With water level sensors, 50% say they would, with 3% already using it. With the rainfall sensors, 42% say they would consider it, with 8% already using it. And another limitation that the ranchers posed to the researchers was that in most locations, communication was going to be a problem due to the cellular coverage limitation. So we set out to develop precision ranching system and evaluate its impact on ranch input cost, with objectives to deploy and test precision technologies able to log, transmit, and analyze sensor data in real time, develop a rancher dashboard that will display sensor data, and then determine whether real-time remote monitoring of weather/forage, livestock, water tanks, and animal activity can increase operation efficiency and lower production costs. And I will go into details what we mean by these kind of objectives here in the next slide. So for the communication platform, we settled with LoRaWAN, which stands for Long Range Wide Area Network. These communication platforms enable you to transfer small data packets over a large distance with a theoretical kind of distance of 8 kilometers to 10 kilometers. And it is a low power and has the capabilities of having a bidirectional kind of communication, meaning that you can configure these LoRaWAN devices remotely through your computer. If you want more publication about the LoRaWAN, I've listed them in my introduction here. And Dr. Tony Waterhouse, 2019, has a publication where these LoRaWAN real-time GPS acquisition is embedded in the livestock system. The figure that I'm presenting to you down here is how the data will flow within this system. And with the first box representing sensors, and here we have animal sensors, which are presented by the collars, which in our experiment will be collecting GPS and accelerometer data. And for the environment, I have a LoRaWAN enabled rain gauge sensor that will also be transmitting data through the LoRaWAN infrastructure. And one of the components that is extremely important in this platform is the infrastructure itself, the placement of the antenna. How are you going to backhaul that information into the internet cloud? is a case-dependent kind of variable, and I believe it's a presentation of its own, so I will not go into a lot of details about it. But in overall, the information will be pushed into the cloud system, and depending on what sensor you're using, you have a surveillance kind of dashboard. For instance, in our experiment, we are using trackers from Abiway, and there's an Abiway platform called an Abiway device manager where you can view those GPS coordinates and accelerometer reading. And for the Decent Lab, there is a Decent Lab platform where you can view these environmental sensors like water level, troughs, and so forth. Our proposal was then to create a dashboard instead of having this as just a tool, to have it on the decision-making kind of platform. And by doing that, we were going to combine data from these different platforms of surveillance and pretty much summarize them to make sure that they answer specific questions that the ranchers are most interested in. And the diagram down here is what is showing what I mean by translating the data from a tool base to a producer oriented in the decision-making kind of platform. So for the next slide, I will show one of the surveillance mechanisms that we're having with the Abiway device manager. So with the animal sensors, as I've said earlier, we are using Abiway trackers, and we have two of them, industrial trackers and compact trackers, represented by the figure down here. The industrials are the white, while the compacts are the black ones. Both of them are LoRaWAN enabled. Both of them collect position, accelerometer, and temperature. The compact tracker has an RFID technology with Bluetooth kind of enabling, and this gives us a rich data in describing proximity data between collared animals. Like whenever they come into a proximity of each other, it will register a contact. And I will show you how we will be using that data in the next slides as well. And for the compact tracker, they're using AA batteries, which are pretty accessible anywhere in the world. And in both devices, they are missing this animal accessory. And in our example, we just put the collar around the strap and mounted it on the animal's neck. To the right here, I'm showing you the Abiway device manager platform. It's extremely user-friendly with buttons that are self-explanatory. You can control the temporal resolution of the data that you are managing. And here I'm just showing you an outlay of some of the colors represented in different color coding. But this is what we were trying to also bring in the dashboard application on. Like, how can we translate this data to answer questions that are critical to a ranch manager? Instead of just looking at GPS units, maybe an overall distance traveled within a day might be a better metric for the ranchers to make a decision on the data. So on the dashboard application where we're translating that data, I'm going to consider a cow-calf operation, splitting them into 3 phases. When the cow is not having a calf with the non-nursing phase, when the cow is going through paturation, and on the next slide is when the cow is associated with its calf. On the cow-calf kind of component, probably the non-nursing cow will be the majority of the time, and threshold values are extremely important. What I mean by these threshold values are overall mean values that we can say that these are normal behaviors a cow is supposed to be doing within a day. And any deviations from those means would mean abnormality, and probably we will set a signal to the rancher to intervene on that particular cow that did not perform to our expected values. To the right here, I'm showing you an accelerometer data that was collected by the industrial trackers throughout one day. And you can see these spikes of movement intensity concurring to what we're expecting to be grazing bouts as illustrated by Gregorini 2012. But also for Gatti, 2020 has demonstrated that machine learning can be used to exploit the data from these accelerometer data to give us a time budget. What I mean by time budget is more like what amount of time within a day was this cow spending resting, spending grazing, or spending traveling. So one application of this data could be as follows. Let's say lameness is probably only second to mastitis in dairy cows in terms of detrimental effects on dairy cows. And a good correlation to lameness could be a reduction in time spent grazing. Tobin et al. 2020, also using accelerometer data, was able to detect ephemeral bovine fever 1 day before clinical symptoms. So this is giving us that resolution that just using accelerometer data, we can address a lot of animal welfare problems. But the infrequent GPS data could also be used to calculate distance traveled, area explored, and some spatial analysis, for instance, water visitation. And this could be packaged in a daily kind of temporal scale. And any deviations from those kind of established means will be an abnormality and alert the ranch manager. Paturation is probably one of the most important phases in a cow-calf operation. And McIntosh and others preliminary study who looked at a handful of variables, for instance, distance travel, velocity, and area explored, noted that during calving dates, there was a diminishing of the area explored. With this kind of data, we can now pretty much use it to decipher when a cow is about to calve, and therefore give out alerts to a ranch manager so that they can intervene or assess the cow when it's going through this crucial period. So for the next phase, when the cow is associated with the calf, publications, previous publications from our lab has noted that cow-calf contact events happen throughout the day, as denoted by the figure here. We were using proximity loggers that were on the dam and the calf. And from that data, Simpson and others, 2020, mined the data to see if they can come up with a calf-cow, dam offspring kind of pairing. And on her results here, I'm showing you some of the figures that she had on her publication. For instance, dam 1 was associated with proximity collar number 6, and dam 10 was associated with proximity collar number 8. When we looked at the ranch managers' data, they were concurring with the dam offspring kind of pairing, meaning that just using the proximity data, we could come up with a cow-calf pedigree. The new collars, the compact trackers, I've noted you that they have the Bluetooth RFID reader, and that kind of data acquisition can give us a resolution of these kind of components where we can come up with a cow-calf kind of pedigree as well. Other research have also established a land to a U kind of pairing using this proximity analysis, as well as denoted by Tony Waterhouse et al. 2019. I'm sorry, the bar is covering my screen. Okay. So at the last part, I wanted to also touch on the management part of precision agriculture dashboard application. So what can it also offer us? It can offer us a platform where we can locate animals by just using the last GPS data acquired, but also it has the capability of merging all these different gadgets into one dashboard, looking at water troughs, rain gauge sensors, and there are other environmental sensors that are out there, for instance, temperature, humidity, but we can also put sensors on gates to make sure that they are closed, and having just one layout where all this information is merged into a platform. And the last part is about data management, as I've said, with a cow-calf pedigree, but also knowing which calf is in which pasture, how many cows are in that pasture. And we can also do some analysis, like whenever a cow has exited a pasture, to give a ranch manager a warning. Here, I'm just showing you a little animation at the Jornada experimental range at a pasture which is about 2,500 hectares. The green line outlining the fence, the dark blue dots being water troughs, light blue dots being GPS acquisition of the cow. And whenever they turn red is when the cow has made contact with its calf. So I'm just giving you an outlay of how precision agriculture can merge this data all together. So now that I've finished with our dashboard, I'll go into the future research that we will be looking at as well. So with the virtual fencing, we will be using a Nofence company, which is a Norwegian company. But to just explain what I mean by virtual fencing, it's pretty much controlling distribution of livestock without using a physical boundary. And for this component to work, you need first the livestock, and there is an application platform for that the Nofence company has already deployed, and you have the caller, which will be giving out cues to this animal. So the rancher will be able to just draw a polygon of where they want the animals to be having access to. And whenever that animal approaches this virtual fence boundary, it will receive a combination of cues, audio, and a mild electric shock as a negative reinforcement for it to return to that designated area. These callers will be giving us GPS and accelerometer data, and they're using the 4G network communication platform. The GPS and accelerometer data, we can use it to feed it to our dashboard application. And we also noted that not a lot of rural America is covered by 4G. So these callers have the capability of working autonomously out of the network once configured with the polygon that these animals are supposed to be in. Also, the future of this study was to also try to come up with recommendations for best practice in training the animals, these callers, but also give out a recommendation of what kind of polygon shape or size is appropriate for best animal management in the rangeland setting. So with that, I will conclude my presentation by noting some potential of precision agriculture. So some of the potential, it has the potential to reduce ranch monitoring costs. It has the potential to reduce environmental footprints of monitoring. It has the potential to free up ranchers' time, improve animal welfare, respond to changes in consumer preference with traceability, as I've noted with the cow-calf pedigree. And in some areas, it has the potential to improve grazing management. And with that, I'll end my presentation and say thank you. I'm sorry if I have gone over time.
Thank you, Shelomia. Thank you so much. Great presentation. For all of you that have questions for Shelomia, please put them in the chat box. Our Q&A session will be right after our next presentation by Stephanie Besselmeyer, who is the Executive Director of the Assombro Institute, and Amelia Lindley, who's the Program Leader for Special Programs. They work at the nonprofit Assombro Institute for Science Education. Assombro has won numerous awards for their work translating cutting-edge research into age-appropriate and standards-aligned lessons for kindergarten through 12th grade students and teachers. So Stephanie and Amelia, we'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Emily. Thanks for that nice introduction. So what we try to do at the Assombro Institute is we're working with the Sustainable Southwest Beef Project to really think about how can we take this amazing research that Dr. Shelomia and others are working on and figure out a way to get it into the hands and minds of students. And so we're going to give you just a little taste of that today. So we really have two goals with what we're doing with our project. And one is kind of, as I mentioned, to take this cutting edge technology and get it into classrooms and to other places where students are learning. And we hope to make them even slightly as excited as those kids over there on the bottom right. But it's also really important to us that we're also trying to flow the information the other way, because we want to figure out what the ideas and perceptions of this next generation of ranchers and consumers and other parts of the workforce, what they think about some of these technologies. And then the research teams have been very open to kind of hearing some of these ideas and thinking about different ways to approach both the research and the extension for this project. So we are gonna just show you very briefly 4 lessons that we've completed or are in development related to precision ranch technologies. And we're just gonna give you a snapshot of these, and most importantly, tell you how you can get in touch with us to learn more, or put teachers in touch with us if they would like to learn more. But all 4 of these lessons that we're going to preview today have a couple of things in common. And one is that they are all aligned with next generation science standards. And these are the standards that are used in full, or the foundations are used in 44 states in the US, used by about 71% of the kids in the United States. So it means that by creating lessons that are aligned with these next generation science standards, they're automatically going to be useful for teachers all over the country. We also want to make sure that by the end of our project, we have some activities that are useful in classrooms, and we have some activities that are useful in non-formal education settings as well. And these would be things like 4-H or after-school programs or summer camps, for example. So I'll start out by just telling you about our lessons. We'll go from youngest to oldest, and we'll start out with our first grade lesson on cow and calf behavior. And this, the performance expectation from those next generation science standards is shown above. And it says that we should try to get those first graders to read texts and use media to determine patterns in behavior of parents and offspring that help the offspring survive. So we saw that standard and thought that thinking about the criollo, and especially using some of those amazing animations that Shalomia shared with you all and with us, would be a way to tell this story and help students understand this standard. So Amelia made some great videos where we highlight some of the researchers from this project. And then, as you can see over there on the right, after students do some hands-on activities to learn more about this topic, we actually show them the bird's eye view of those locations from the GPS collars, and really point out where we can see that the cows are spending time or in close proximity to their calves, and how those GPS locations actually help us know when that occurs. Our 5th grade lesson is about the virtual fence technology Shalomia mentioned. And for this one, there's an entirely different standard for 5th grade. And it says that those 5th graders should be able to obtain and combine information about the way communities use science ideas to protect the Earth's resources and the environment. So we thought the virtual fence story was an excellent example of this, and it would be a way for us to really get this cutting edge technology into schools. So we again have videos, we have all kinds introducing students to the virtual fence technology. Amelia did some interviews with Dr. Shalomia and Dr. McIntosh, so they get to meet some of the scientists actually doing some of this research. And then they use very simple materials. They use yarn and marbles and do various trials, which model what it would be like to try to keep cows out of an exclusion area, either with or without a virtual fence to assist the rancher. Now, as we move up to 12 years and older, I'll turn it over to Amelia to tell you about Solving the Beef.
Thank you. So Solving the Beef is a game that we currently have available online that anyone can download. This particular game has been targeted toward students ages 12 plus, and we did use the science standard from Next Generation Science Standards that in this game, they're actually evaluating a solution to a complex real-world problem based on a prioritized criteria and trade-offs that account for a range of constraints, including cost, safety, reliability, aesthetics, as well as possible social, cultural, and environmental impacts. So in this game, students are given different scenarios, and they choose a scenario card, and those scenarios are based off of this study. So right now we currently have one on precision ranching tools, and we have other cards that have been created based off of the study itself, such as Criollo cattle being a heritage breed. Then the constraints actually come directly from the standard. So those constraints that we have are the constraints of cost, safety, reliability, aesthetics, social, cultural, and environmental impacts. And when you play the game, you are actually reading the scenario card, thinking about the constraint, and trying to come up with solutions with those two things combined. The nice thing about this particular game is that it will expand as the study expands. So right now, the precision ranching tools mostly focuses on the cow tracking and the water sensors, but since there are more studies going on, this game will expand to include the virtual fencing and other precision tool technologies. Next slide, please. On the note of precision wrenching tools, we also have created a high school lesson that's that asks the students, the high school students, to look at precision tools. And this is based off of the standard that they are to evaluate or refine a technological solution that reduces impacts of human activities on natural systems. So in this particular activity, we actually start off with an engage activity, and that's at the far left-hand side of your screen. Students are given a number based off of a little tube that they receive, and that number tells them what number their cows are. So they have a pack of cows that they have to find. Then they need to find any missing cows because they're supposed to have so many in their pack. Then they're supposed to go to all of the water tanks, fill them up, and they're supposed to do all of this within the time frame of 2 minutes. So it's a very busy activity to show them how much work goes into the farming process. After that, we then introduce them to the precision tools that are currently available, the cow tracker and the water level sensor, and then they're able to see how those precision tools make ranching and ranch land management that much easier. Next slide, please. At the end of the lesson, they're then supposed to refine one of those precision ranching tools to solve at least one potential problem. So when they're playing at those models of these precision tools, they're coming up with possible potential problems for these tools. And then at the end, they actually refine the problem. So that is going toward the standard itself. And it's an engaging activity from beginning to end that we at Asombro are able to teach in classrooms once we're back in person. Next slide, please. Speaking of education, we do have some summer educator workshops that we have for elementary 3rd grade teachers and high school teachers coming up this summer. We don't have dates currently available for these, but if you do know anyone that is in education that you think would love to have these lessons in their classrooms, we are offering these workshops where we will be giving tools and other lessons to the teachers that they can teach themselves, and then offering some of our lessons that we discussed in this session today. So please do let people know. And thank you.
Thank you, Amelia. Thank you, Stephanie. I'm always so impressed by the work that Asombro does. The Climate Hub has worked with Asombro for since 2014, and I think our biggest challenge and bottleneck is making sure this information gets to teachers. So all of you on the call today, please send me a personal email, send it to Steph or Amelia if you know teachers who would be interested in having these ready-made units that are available. If you have questions for Steph and Amelia, please put them in the chat box. And there are many questions here for Shelomia. And so Shelomia, we're going to do a rapid fire Q&A session where I'm setting my timer to 1 minute, and we're going to get through as many of these questions as we can. And then what we don't get through, we will reply to the people directly with the answers to those questions. So the first question is from Sergio. What's the potential to scale up the application of the technologies especially in terms of cost benefit?
Yes, that's a beautiful question. Oh wow, you are really timing me.
I really am.
Okay, so I think the most important application in setting up these precision agriculture is the network. If you get the network correct, then the scaling up becomes very simple for you. Just having those gateways positioned at the right location will give you the ability to now add any kind of sensors within that covered kind of radius. And as I've said, the theoretical kind of radius is 8 to 10 kilometers. So within that area, you can have temperature sensors, water level sensors, animal trackers, to whatever number you want. And there's a publication that I wanted to also highlight that is going to come out on Rangeland with Matthew McIntosh that has gone through the cost analysis on 150 cows. And I think he calculated for the implementation of these equipment to range around $50 to $90 per collaring, with the fixed cost and the variable cost embedded in it with the 150 cows. I'm above 1 minute, am I?
Perfect, 1 minute, awesome. Next question is from Marcia, and it's about, the question's how well do the collars transmit data in rugged terrain, especially where there's no cell phone reception?
Another good question. So the implementation of this precision ranching will be case dependent. For instance, you might need more than one gateway. The locations of those gateways, if it's a rugged terrain, but you have the gateway on a topography like in a high elevation, it can give you a better coverage. So it's very case dependent, but there are also a lot of softwares out there that can model for you how the coverage will be at a certain location by putting in topographic maps and some descriptions of those antenna, like the height and so forth.
Oh, wow. Good job. Awesome. Did you get to finish answering that question?
I think so. Yep.
Great. Okay. Justin's asking about two different fences. So wondering how the Nofence compares to vents.
Yep.
Do you know?
Yep. So another good question. So both of these Nofence and the vents are virtual fence devices. And for the vents system, it uses the LoRaWAN communication, but the Nofence uses the 4G kind of communication. So that is one difference. And they're both used for livestock, so you can put them in cows. But I think the Nofence has one for smaller ruminants like goats and sheep. So yeah, I think that is the only difference. And I think also Nofence is going to deploy its commercial application in the United States coming in the late of 2020, I believe.
Excellent, thanks. The next question is, how can ranchers and researchers get involved with testing these technologies?
Okay. I guess I can leave my email address, and we can get you connected to our group leader, who is Dr. Tsumi Santiago, and I believe he'll have a better answer for you on that kind of application of technologies in your research as well.
Absolutely, we'd love to support testing with more people, so we can talk about that. Perfect. And then Hugo's asking, what is the cost of each different tracking device around the cattle's neck? Cow's necks.
Yes, sir. So the animal sensors that we were opting for is like just one gadget having all the components, like the GPS, accelerometer, and temperature. And that was done purposefully in the sense that one does, gets an equipment off the shelf and implements it on his or her precision agriculture. So as I've said, there's a publication by Matthew McIntosh that is in the chef's hand, getting cooked up, but his analysis was like, for the implementation with 150 collars, you are looking at the range of $50 to $90 per deployment of those sensors, I believe.
Excellent, thanks. I'm going to shift questioning. So for Steph and Amelia, is there a cost for teachers to participate in your lessons?
That's a great question. For many of these, the answer is no. And for the teacher workshops, we're actually even offering stipends. So it kind of depends a little bit on which lesson, but in general, we're going to have a lot of lessons that are available for free online. And then for the teacher workshops, we actually will pay teachers for their time to come and learn about these, and then give them the materials they need to do the lessons in their classes.
Excellent. Thanks, Steph. And I believe we're actually on schedule right now. So we will have 8 more minutes at the end of Mike Crimmins and his talk on my range. So we will try to get through these other questions. If you have more questions for Asambro, for Steph and Amelia, if you think of another question for Shelamia, or if you think of a question for Mike while he's talking, please, again, use the chat box and share them, and we'll get through as many as we can. Mike Crimmins has worked with the Southwest Hub from the beginning. He's on the faculty of the Department of Environmental Science at the University of Arizona, and he's an extension specialist in climate science for Arizona Cooperative Extension. He's done some amazing work. He's been in this role for 15 years, working with ranchers, farmers, and natural resource managers across Arizona to integrate climate information in their planning and decision-making, and assisting them in developing strategies to adapt to climate change. Mike.
Thanks, Emily. Did I get it?
You're set.
Okay,
Yes,
good. After a year and so many months now, I can't believe I'm still struggling with Zoom. Anyways, thank you so much. What a cool set of projects to be lumped in with today, and I really appreciate being able to talk about our project as well today. So as Emily said, I'm an extension specialist over here at University of Arizona, and I've been working with ranchers and land managers for about 15 years now, thinking about how to integrate climate information into decision making. And so this is a project that I've done with some colleagues over almost the last 5 or 6 years, and I'm excited to talk to you about it today. And so we had a project about 6 years ago where we were working with some ranchers and land managers in central Arizona, talking about drought planning in particular. And so there's a lot of issues, information access, information to planning tools. And one thing that came up with the project that was really interesting to us was just this whole discussion about access to rain gauge information. And the idea, are there rain gauges in the locations that they need to have rain gauge information? So precipitation information for decision making. And so this was a quote from some of our interview work with some of the Forest Service managers, was that they in particular would like to see some more rain gauges, and having their discussions with annual operating instructions and doing drought monitoring with some of the ranchers. But it wasn't just the land managers. In discussion with the ranchers as well was, are there some strategies that we can implement to have more of this information at our fingertips? And so this project is kind of an integration of both low tech and high tech. And so quite honestly, this has been a strategy in land management and range management in particular, for over 100 years. It's just simple ways of collecting rainfall information over time. So currently, simple capped PVC gauges that measure cumulative precipitation over time, that's what we're going to talk about today, can be effective rain gauges at remote locations. And so we've been working with ranchers and land managers to think about the construction of these. Can we innovate and think of new materials to use for these rain gauges? Can we think about where to place and read these that will optimize the cost benefit, the time to read a gauge versus the benefit of that information, and then how to actually manage and utilize these information. So my range log in particular, what I'll talk about today, is a tool that is more on the high tech end of how to actually take this low tech information from these PVC gauges. And so there's a lot of information out here. This is just a couple of resources here at U of A. This was my colleague, Jeff Shalau. Just a very simple one pager on what to do with how to construct a PVC rain gauge. And this is simple white PVC that you get at the hardware store. You cap it, you'd fill it with a little bit of antifreeze to keep it from cracking in the winter, and a little bit of oil to stop evaporation, and then the gauge would just fill up. So you'd measure it over time. Some of the ranchers we were working with were, can we do a little bit better? It's hard to drop a tape in there and get a good reading. Can we design a better rain gauge? Just a quote from one of our ranchers: cow-proof, easy to read and maintain, inexpensive, rugged, and long-lasting. And so we did this with them, innovating with them, thinking about these materials. And we have an extension bulletin, which I'll drop into the chat window so you have an access to this. This gives you some step-by-step directions of actually using clear Schedule 40 PVC to make a clear gauge that's going to last for many years out in the field, and then has a gauge on the outside so you don't have to drop a tape in anymore. A screen cap and a funnel to improve the readings, and a little valve at the bottom to actually be able to reset the gauge without removing it from the post. We also worked with them to come up with these range management precipitation monitoring best practices guide. thinking about where to put a gauge, how often to read it, and how to use some tools that will help you interpret the observations. And in this guide, we have this particular example, which is just a way of sort of thinking about cumulative precipitation. So again, this is different than the way we usually do backyard monitoring, which is a gauge that you're reading every morning, you're getting that total, you're emptying it, and you're writing that total down. So over time, you can have a cumulative total, but these are going to be unattended gauges. And until we have those really nice high-tech gauges out at remote locations we have access to, this is sort of a simple way of doing it. A zeroed out gauge that you read a couple of times through a season is going to give you information about potentially making some management decisions. And in the background here, these lines are reference climatologies. And so that's kind of one of the key things that I wanted to show you with some of the tools we have here today, is integrating long-term climatological information estimates at those locations to think about wettest runs of years or driest, to give you a sense of that observation that you're reading maybe for the first time at this site. Is it unusual for that location? I've got a really, it's kind of a medium tech solution here. And this is a way of, it's a little shiny app, drop a pin anywhere in the country, set your time frame, and it will give you these cumulative curves based on the historical climatology. So this is a way of just having a hard copy printout. You can do it once and be done with it, or return to it, or set it up for several gauges. But my range log is actually the way that you can actually interact, get these same types of reference climatologies in an interactive way. And so my range log is myrangelog.arizona.edu. It's a free account-based system where you can enter as many gauges as you want. Create your account. It'll bring up a gauge dashboard, and on this gauge dashboard, it'll tell you things like the last time you entered a log over a particular time range that you set. So as you set your time range, all of your statistics on your dashboard for your gauges change. You can add new gauges, and you can add new information right from the gauge dashboard site. And then as you click on each one of your gauges, you have its own dashboard, and it will give you things like all of your previous logs with comments and photos that you may have entered, the cumulative total at that particular site, and it will give you an in-depth report, which I'll show you here in just a second. And one other key feature here too is that we made it so that you could share your observations or keep them private. So if you can have a mix, some gauges could be public, some gauges could be private. So the tool is really about managing your data. When you get a gauge report, it gives you a page like this. And so it's going to have the reference climatology, also the Prism graded climate estimate for that location, which is the blue line, and your data. So all of these things compared together to assess what you're seeing at your site. And they're referenced against these percentiles, which are roughly relative to standard deviation. So 98th percentile, 2 standard deviations, second, 2 standard deviations below average. And so that just gives you a way of sort of comparing to some existing drought indices like the standardized precipitation index. And then you can also, we've just added this feature, is compare previous years and previous graded precipitation estimates. So you can have your current observations. You may wonder that last bad drought year or good year, what did it look like with my gauge observations and the Prism estimate to that site? You can add that as well. And then finally, we have all the information you're collecting at the site is also available in a table. And so that table will pull up your comments and your photos. And so we're really encouraging people to actually enter the comments, what they're seeing at the site, and then the photos as well, to be able to go back to previous records and sort of make an assessment of those changes that you're seeing, not only in the data, but then sort of visually and anecdotally with these observations. And then you can also have the ability to share these particular observations. The way you set up your customized report has a custom copy URL, and you can shoot it off in a text or an email, and it'll go off to that person to share it with. And then finally, the public map here. These are, this is sort of a growing number of sites. These are the publicly shared observations. So just show you that Mitch McLaren, one of my colleagues in this project, is entering all the Santa Rita experimental range data. And here's a particular site down at Santa Rita. And you can see the data that he's been entering is pretty bleak. And you can then look at all of these other sites. And if you're not contributing observations yourself, you can still use the information that others are contributing on the site. And then really finally, this is also a smartphone ready application. So it's been programmed that'll work on Apple or Android, and all the sites are ready for smartphone. And it also has an offline option as well. So as long as you set up your account when you're online, if you go offline and out of cell coverage, you can still make your observations and still interact with some of your previous data. So that gives that ability to work in sort of remote areas. We have an info page, info.myrangelog.arizona.edu, which has help information, but we also set up a YouTube channel, which has videos on all of these features and an overview video as well. So thanks for your attention, and I'd be happy to field any questions as well.
All right, thanks, Mike. Excellent presentation, and I'm curious. I actually have a question. Did you say those reference climatologies are available anywhere in the country? You can drop a pin anywhere in the U.S. and get those reference climatologies?
Yes, so MyRangeLog works anywhere in the continental U.S. and the same for any of the other tools there. It's because it's undergirded by the Prism data set, so it doesn't work in Hawaii, unfortunately, or Alaska, because that is not available on a daily update cycle.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, Mike. Please add any questions for Mike into the chat box, and I'm going to circle back to some of the earlier questions that we had. There was one for Shelamia, and it's Kevin asked this question, and it's sort of a comment and a question on the phrase of virtual fence, and he's interested in your thoughts. And so the phrase is, we will be better off if we think of it as virtual herding rather than staying within the context of fence lines. How can we move to use this tool in a way that integrates the best of what good herders can do? Thoughts?
I agree with that comment completely. You know, the proof of concept in these devices, not only have they managed to hold these cows, they have managed to herd the cows over the land. There's some research that has also shown that these devices can be used to isolate two cows within a pasture. For instance, you're having two bulls, you do not want them to be in proximity to each other to avoid confrontations. So this device can be used on that application as well. So yeah, virtual herding is probably a better term than virtual fencing, but I was just going with the literature out there, and virtual fencing was more predominant, I guess. But good comment.
Yeah, maybe we'll add that to our Sustainable Southwest Beef vocabulary list, and we'll coin a new phrase, virtual herding. I'm checking the messages here, and there is a string, there's really a conversation going on in the chat box, and it started with a question that Lane asked, which is, once cattle get used to a virtual fence in a specific place, what's the animal's behavior when the fence is taken down or otherwise need to be moved? In other words, do you have trouble moving cows through an area that was previously virtual fenced? And I thought that was a fascinating question. There are a lot of responses. Did you want to sort of riff on that or sort of respond to what you see in the chat box, Shelamia?
So that's another excellent question. So our virtual fencing, oh, maybe I should start using virtual herding experiment has not yet started. We will be starting our deployment probably in the next 2 months. And that was another question that we wanted to also address, like how do we affect the animal when we move that virtual paddock to another location? Do they need time to, or do we need to reinforce the training when we do such an activity? So it's again another good question, and yes, we will be addressing that in our research.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Shelamia. And I see that in the chat box, we do have a project manager with us, and what I hear is that they have wide experience with cattle, sheep, and goats adapting to both expanding and retracting the virtual fence well. So that's from their experience that has worked well. And they, again, have had some positive experience moving animals by giving them access to fresh pastures, typically like a managed grazing system. So thanks for that. And thank you for being here and answering that question. Let's see, Mike, there's a question about your recipe for antifreeze and oil in the ring gauges.
Yes, thanks, Emily. And I got it. I replied in chat if anybody wants to see that. I actually talk about this in the extension bulletin that I posted in there. I've got a couple of thoughts on that. And much to my wife's chagrin, I actually did some testing in our freezer here at home to try to freeze some gauges and crack them. And I didn't have any luck. I did have some conversations with ranchers though. PVC tends to get brittle over time. And so they can freeze and crack, I think, if after some exposure to the sun. But in that extension bulletin are some ideas and recommendations on that concept.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. And thanks for putting that web link in the chat as well. So I'm going to share a question with all of you, and it's about what you've learned today on the precision ranching technologies, the educational unit, my range. And I'm curious what your biggest concern or information need is.